It appears as though the Trudeau Liberals got the support they needed to pass the very controversial Bill C-10. It's described as a bill to amend the Broadcasting Act. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley, joining us once again from Toronto. Brian, what will this bill mean for the average Canadian who's concerned about his or her free speech?
Well, it means that what you say, what you post online can quite possibly be controlled by the CRTC. Now, the government and the bill supporters say that's not true. And yet, when quizzed, will the CRTC have the ability to order changes to the algorithms of what you see when you search on Google or on YouTube or what you see on Facebook? The minister would not say no. And the reason he wouldn't say no is because he can't say no. It's right in the bill that what they continually call discoverability of Canadian content is written right in there. And so just like the CRTC can and has ordered radio stations for years, if they play music, they have to play at least 30% Canadian content, then, well, they're going to be able to do that with your social media feeds. So if you're following too many Americans, guess what? You're going to be, on your Instagram feed, suddenly it's going to be popping up that here's a Canadian to follow this person, follow that person. And as Michael Geist, who's a University of Ottawa law professor and Canada Research Chair in Internet and E-commerce Law, put it the other day, that means that the government is going to be able to boost up some content and say, here's content you should see. That means they're also going to be saying, here's content you shouldn't see. That is the government controlling what you see on the internet. I've equated this bill for a long time to AOL circa 1995. It got you online, but it didn't get you to the internet. It got you to what they wanted you to see at the time. And maybe that's what you want. But if you want the internet, if you want the World Wide Web, then we won't have that in short order in Canada because of the restrictions that will be put in place by the CRTC through this bill and others the Liberals are bringing forward.
Now, speaking of freedoms, concerns over freedom this summer were recently raised on the Hill when Ottawa released their reopening plans. Part of the plan said we need to have about 75% of Canadians to be vaccinated with at least one shot and 20% with two shots before restrictions can be lifted. Brian, does that kind of go against what the provinces said their plans would look like?
It goes against what every province has talked about. I mean, Saskatchewan is about to start reopening May 31st or is it May 30th, with 70%. They're going to hit a 70% target of adults being vaccinated, and they're going to start the reopening plan. Quebec has just announced their reopening plan, and they're nowhere near that level yet. They will get there shortly, but they'll be reopening before they hit the 70% mark, never mind 75. And there is some concern that we may not get to 75%, that we might hit a threshold of about 70 to 72, 73% of the population, and then it'll just plateau where there's a certain number of people who say they will not get the vaccine because they're opposed to it. There are some people who cannot get the vaccine for medical reasons. I was just speaking with someone the other day who has a severe bee allergy. They can't get the vaccine. They'd like to get it, but they can't. So you add all those together, and then you add in the fact that at a certain point, especially with younger people who are less susceptible to COVID-19, they're just going to say, yeah, you know what, everyone else has it, I don't need it, and besides, the clinic's way over there. So we may not get to that 75% level, and yet the Trudeau Liberals say 75% one dose, 20% two doses before you can start loosening restrictions, and then we need to get everyone to 75% at two doses before we can have things like in-class learning this fall. That may not be feasible, and it goes against what every other province's plans that have been released so far talk about. Again, this is the Trudeau Liberals, the federal government, trying to dictate to the provinces what they should do in an area where it's actually the province's responsibility.
Now, while Prime Minister Trudeau says he wants provinces to keep restrictions in place, Brian, he still will not act on some obvious loopholes at the border. Now, you've investigated the story quite thoroughly. What did you discover?
Well, between my own stories and those by me, colleagues at other media outlets, let me just give you some of the highlights. 88,000 people over a 2-month period were deemed exempt from the hotel quarantine. So, we're all told that if you fly out of the country, then you fly back in, you've got to spend 3 days at a hotel at $2,000. Yet 88,000 people were deemed exempt, and the federal government wouldn't explain why. Another story was about hundreds of private jets flying into airports where they don't have COVID hotels, and even into airports like Pearson, more than 800 flights with private charter jets where they say, we'll have you tested and out before you can even get to the hotel. So there's another loophole. Then at the land border, they tested just over 120,000 people, which works out to about 16% of all the travelers crossing at the land border after you take out the commercial truckers, because commercial truckers that go back and forth every day are exempt from the testing. Again, they wouldn't explain why. Then you look at their claims that we have the most secure borders. We're way behind other countries in terms of how they manage their borders, so that's one lie. They say that non-essential travel is banned, and yet we're at double what we were last year. And then finally, they say, well, it's just Canadians, and we have to let Canadians back into the country. That's true. Canadians have the right to leave or re-enter Canada, and it would be unconstitutional to stop it. But there's lots of other COVID measures that are unconstitutional. But I digress. 110,000 foreign nationals came into Canada between February 22nd and April 18th. That's more than the 105,000 Canadian citizens and permanent residents that came in that same time period. More foreign nationals than Canadian citizens or permanent residents. It doesn't make sense. And yet, even as we get more cases of the 617 Indian variant showing up, the Trudeau Liberals continue to say the border's not an issue. It doesn't lead to more cases. What are we dealing with in Alberta, in Ontario? Third waves driven by the UK variant that back in December they said travel's not an issue. Don't worry about this. We've got the best system in the world. That's clearly not the case, and we can't continue to try and have restrictions for locals while we leave the back door open.
Now, the border is somewhere that many Canadians may be rushing to, not just for a Krispy Kreme donut like I would be doing, but for a COVID-19 vaccine. Brian, under some conditions, you say Canadians can go to the United States for a vaccine shot and not have to quarantine?
Yeah, this came from pressure by the city of Windsor, which of course is right across from Detroit. And in Michigan, they are kind of hitting a plateau. They've got more vaccines than they can use right now, and some of them are about to expire. And they're also having a problem that we hear about at various mass vaccine clinics. By the end of the day, you better have enough people there, or you're going to have to, just throw out, discard some shots that could otherwise be used. Well, people in Detroit were saying, we'd like to offer this to the city of Windsor. We want to vaccinate our neighbors. And it took almost a week for the mayor of Windsor and the head of the local hospital system in Windsor to get an answer that yes, if you go across the border to get a vaccine, that you don't have to quarantine coming back. Now, I got excited because you know where I am, Hal, in Toronto. It's very close to Niagara Falls and Buffalo. I could zip across in about an hour and a half. And I thought, great, I'll go over, I'll hit CVS, I'll get my vaccine, I'll do some shopping, I'll go to, get some buffalo wings, the home of the chicken wing. No, you've got to go straight there and straight back. And you need a note from a Canadian medical professional, and you need it in writing that you have an appointment with someone on the American side. So it will be pretty strict. You can't use it just for tourism. You can't go get a Krispy Kreme, but they are allowing this to happen on a larger scale than what we've seen with the provincial agreements, such as I believe Manitoba and Alberta have had similar agreements. Now it's going to be for anyone within driving distance of the border.
Brian, but who am I kidding? Any donut will do. I mean, I love Tim Hortons donuts just as much as Krispy Kreme. You say donut, I'm there. I'm almost like Homer. Now, the head of Canada's vaccine task force, Major General Danny Fortin, was removed from his post recently over sexual misconduct allegations, Brian. And some of these allegations go way back to 1989.
1989, when he was at the Royal Military College in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in Quebec, a school that closed shortly thereafter. It is we're talking about allegations that go back 31, 32 years. We don't know what they are. We don't officially know what they are. According to some media reports, Fortin is alleged to have exposed himself to a woman. Now, we don't know the details. He only learned of the allegation through a reporter calling him this past Sunday. Even though the military had been investigating for months, the Prime Minister had known for weeks. Fortin still didn't know what the allegation was when he got a call at his home this past Sunday. And he says he denies the allegation. Now, what gets me is that on Tuesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked several questions about this at a news conference, Hal. And he's talking about allegations that are 31, 32 years old, and he's sitting in judgment of Major General Danny Fortin. Now, I believe that the allegations against Fortin or anybody else in the military, they need to be investigated. But we've got a prime minister sitting in judgment who faces his own allegations of groping a woman at it's always known as the Kokanee Grope at the Creston Valley Summit back in British Columbia back in 2000. And he just simply said that she experienced it differently, that he doesn't recall any negative interactions. And he's allowed to skate away on this. He's allowed to get away with it. It rings hollow when the man at the top trying to set the rules and saying the military needs to do better has never been held to account himself.
Brian, Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline remains up in the air. Now, the line that takes Alberta oil to Ontario and Quebec did come up in Canada-U.S. trade talks this week. What can you tell us?
Well, International Trade Minister Mary Ng brought it up during a virtual meeting regarding USMCA, the new Canada-U.S. Trade deal. They were, discussing various elements of that, and she raised this in a very stern way, saying that don't let this get in the way of ongoing trade. The Trudeau government is finally taking this issue seriously. I think they should have been taking it seriously much earlier than they have, but they have raised it in court. They filed an amicus briefing, a friend of the court briefing, to try and say that Canada needs standing. They also want it moved from local court in Michigan to a federal court because they want to invoke a treaty that is specific to pipelines that cross the Canada-U.S. border to serve one country or the other by going through the other country. They want to invoke that because they say any attempt to shut down Line 5 will go against that. So several different moves being made. Finally, this is something that I can tell you the Ford government here in Ontario raised back in the winter. They were mocked for it by the media, by the opposition. People said this isn't an issue, and they said it will be an issue if this Line 5 is shut down. That hasn't happened. Mediation talks between the government of Michigan and Enbridge continue, and hopefully there can be a resolution there. If not, it goes on to the courts. As I think I've mentioned before, close to 50% of the jet fuel used at Pearson goes through there. An awful lot of the gas used to fuel cars across Ontario and Quebec comes through that pipeline, is refined in Sarnia, Ontario. We need this pipeline to stay open.
Brian, CBC lost a lawsuit they launched against the federal Conservatives in the last election, claiming their ads using CBC clips broke the law. Now, you say that the CBC should have seen this coming, but that by launching the lawsuit, the CBC made themselves out to be political actors.
They made themselves political actors, Hal, because it was 10 days before the voting took place that they launched a lawsuit against the Conservatives, effectively telling their audience these guys are bad dudes who break the law. But they should have known that they were going to lose this because political parties have been using news clips in ads going back decades. This is established precedent. They should have known they were going to lose. It falls under what's called fair dealing under Canada's copyright laws. And if you use short clips, not the majority of the work, not a substantial portion of the work, and you give credit, you can use the small parts of somebody else's copyrighted work. They were even warned about it by their own internal officers back in 2014. They were trying to launch a lawsuit in 2014, about a year and a half before the October 2015 campaign, again against the Conservatives. And their own team said, this doesn't even violate CBC's standards for airing an ad, never mind the law. Yet they still went ahead with this. So they've lost. So far, they haven't said if they're going to appeal, but they have said that they are considering it. Right now, if they don't appeal, it means they've lost and they owe the Conservative Party costs, which will be substantial.
Costs, yes, that our tax dollars will pay for. Same thing with the appeal. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was the subject of some online mocking over photos of him using a laptop with an Apple logo on it, despite clearly not being an Apple product. Now, this story has had both his critics and supporters talking.
Well, they're all talking. His critics are laughing at him and saying that this is something that shows that just like everything else with Justin Trudeau, it's fake. He appears to be using an HP laptop, but it's and he's at a training session for Liberal volunteers, but it's got an Apple logo over the HP logo. You just look along the side and you can tell it's got an HP charge cord and all these ports that Apple simply doesn't use. So it hasn't used in years and years. And the sticker's kind of wonky. It's not quite on straight. So it looks fake. So a lot of people laughing, people responding to tweets about this. One guy saying, "Oh, this is going too far," and he taped an alligator across his golf shirt like a Lacoste, but it was a big plastic alligator, making fun of Justin Trudeau. But his supporters, they were outraged and said, "Why would anyone raise this? This is obviously awful journalism." And they were very upset. So they were worried about their own brand on this. Both sides, like, look, if your side gets a story like this, just laugh it off or let the other side laugh it off. It ain't going away. Engaging the way the Liberals did and throwing a hissy fit just makes you look bad.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.